Hello, hello, hello. It's great to be with you all. So the old joke goes, I used to be one of you. Young. And thank you very much for that kind introduction and for the wonderful award. Thanks to Generation Progress, a lot's been happening, and you've organized an incredible event here. And I also want to thank Nira and Winnie for the Center for American Progress. And I pointed out in the back, the reason I'm late is because of the founder of the for CAP, and that is a fellow who now works in the White House named John Podesta. It's all John's fault. Seriously, John put together a meeting with the cabinet and the key people, the president and me, on energy and the environment. And it was supposed to end at 12:20 so that I'd get here on time. And the president looked at his watch, and John said, well, we can come back. And the president said, no, I got another half hour. And so I love you all, but when the president says he has another half hour, it means I have another half hour. Most of all, I want to thank you all for being here, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. I learned a long time ago, running as a kid for the United States Senate. Now, I say kid now. They said kid then, and I didn't like them saying kid, even though I wasn't old enough to be sworn in when I got elected. But I learned something very early in my career, and I mean this sincerely, whether it was joining the civil rights movement when I was a 16-year-old kid or when I got elected as a 29-year-old young man. Showing up is half the battle. It sounds corny, but showing up is half the battle. And I want to thank you all for showing up and sharing your passion on the issues that, in my view, matter most to this great country of ours. When I was preparing this speech, and I know everybody thinks I just talk off the top of my head, but I don't hesitate. No one ever doubts I mean what I say. They sometimes don't like I say all that I mean. But I thought a lot about this because and I'm not being solicitous, you're an incredibly important group. You're an incredibly important constituency. And I'm not being solicitous. I've been where you. That's how I got elected in 1972 as a 29-year-old guy. It was people who had passion, made the time, and were not afraid to say what was on their mind. As I was preparing for this speech, I saw Vice President Cheney was quoted as saying that, and I mean this sincerely now, saying that we should be spending more money on our military, not on food stamps and on highways. Now, I don't take a back seat to anyone when it comes to defending our nation and taking care of our troops. You should know up front, I've said it for my entire career, even back then when I was fighting against the war in Vietnam, that we have only one truly sacred obligation. We have a lot of obligations, but only one truly sacred obligation. I mean this from the bottom of my heart. And that's to care for those who we sent to war when they come home hurt and damaged. That is a sacred obligation. The obligations. I don't take a back seat to anyone, including Vice President Cheney, on the issue of our military. I know what it's like to have a son stationed in Iraq for a year. I know what it's like to have every morning getting up and wondering, is he okay? And you think of it 2, 5, 10, 15 times a day. I'm proud of my sons. I'm proud of my family. But I believe that if we're going to send American warriors to fight, as we were back then in Iraq, we had to provide them what they needed. That's why back in 2007, against Democrats and Republicans, I fought so hard to build a very expensive vehicle called an MRAP. It had a V-shaped bottom to replace those up-armored Humvees, which were literally killing and mangling so many of our young troops. And it cost a lot of money. The point I'm trying to make here is, when it comes to the safety of our warriors, we have to spend the money. But this idea of it's somehow inherently more important to spend money on the military than on our domestic needs is a policy I reject. I reject out of hand. And I believe, like you do, it's important to feed our people. It's as important to do that as it is to fund our military. Do I believe it's important to invest in the arteries that make possible for our economy to flow and succeed in our infrastructure? Yeah, I do. I do. Do I believe it's time for our combat troops to be out not only Iraq but out of Afghanistan? Yes, I do. And I've fought very hard, as you know from the criticism, justified or not, I've fought very hard for that to happen. What all this made me think about is to think about the basic question of all the needs we faced. My dad used to have an expression when I was a kid, and I'd say, but Dad, I thought this was important. He said, Joey, if everything's equally important to you, nothing is important to you. Let me say that again. If everything's equally important to you, nothing is important to you. So it's important that we progressives, make clear what we think our priorities should be. What is it that we care about? What is it that matters most? Who are we as a nation? Who are we going to be? I think that's the most critical thing for us to be doing now, is just simply laying out our priorities without apology. I believe in a nation that first and foremost stands for equal rights, that includes not only the right to marry who you choose based on who you love. It's nobody else's business. It's not the government's business. I'm proud to say that I think the country has moved further and faster toward full marriage equality than anyone ever thought was possible, although I thought it was possible. I believe and spent my, well, I really did. I really did, because you know what? I've been hanging around long enough to know the American people are usually way ahead of their leaders. The American people are usually way ahead of their leaders. I believe, in terms of priorities, I spent my career ensuring that the primary measure of who we are depends in large part how we define ourselves and how we deal with the epidemic of violence against women and campus sexual assault. It's not just the right thing to do, it's a definition. Who we are as a people. Do we mean what we say? And do we mean what we say about what we value? I'm committed to ensuring that our policy adopts a no-tolerance, our country adopts a no-tolerance policy on violence against women and campus sexual assault. I, like you, because it is not just a single issue, I'm committed to eliminating this savagery because it infects our society. I believe in a nation that understands that the single most precious right an American possesses is unfettered access to the ballot box. All other rights flow from that. It is not a minor issue. Every other right flows from that access. I became engaged as a young man in my teens in a state that used to be segregated by law to ensure that all Americans had that right. From fighting in a very small way as a kid for the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to the Voting Rights Act of 65, and as a senator, chairman of the Judiciary Committee, I fought every time for the reauthorization of that Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act of 60. Vote, I have to tell you, I never ever thought I'd be standing here as a grown man in a battle, still for access to the ballot box in the year 2014. Over 90 initiatives have been introduced in the states to curtail, to make it more difficult for the right of Americans to vote. To me, that fight is a priority. I believe, as you do, that climate change is real. And that failure to deal with it would generate the biggest game changer that civilization faces. That's not hyperbole. It's the single most significant challenge civilization faces today. And it's our moral obligation, in large part, with you being the moral center of it, to deal with it and to begin to deal with it now, as the President has. That's why the President has taken the historic step of eliminating carbon emissions and is carrying out the boldest climate change plan in history. I believe we're a nation of immigrants. It's a priority, because here's the deal. It's not about constituencies. It's about the history of the journey of America. We are a nation from our founding that has been built in large part because of the constant, unrelenting stream of immigrants. That's what has made us different. That is what has made us the single most significant nation in the world, able to adapt, unlike any other nation, generation after generation, to change. Ladies and gentlemen, it's long past time for immigration reform, not just because it's the morally right thing to do. It is such an overwhelming advantage. It's such an overwhelming reason why America is what it is today. I believe passionately, in terms of my priorities, what my dad used to say. He used to say after he lost a job, he said, "Joey, a job's about a lot more than a paycheck. It's about respect. It's about your place in your community. It's about your dignity." And I believe that every American, regardless of their station, is entitled to be treated with dignity. It's not just the morally right thing to do. The dignity we accord Americans is the glue that holds together us socially and politically as a stable nation. Absent that, in this heterogeneous society of ours, things will begin to fray. That's why I think it's such a priority. That's why I believe in a nation that says, if you work for a living, if you're a hard-working American, it matters just as much as whether someone lives off their investments. Earned income and unearned income are disproportionately treated today. There's no good reason why hard-working Americans in the middle class have their earned income taxed at such a higher rate than unearned income. Hedge funds and billionaires. We don't hear enough. We don't hear it enough. Working people are job creators too. Since when did it become in this nation that the job creators were the investment bankers, the bankers, and the shareholders? As I grew up, and through the bulk of my career, there was a consensus that the engineers, the line workers, the salespersons, they are as much job creators as anyone else. You know, there used to be a basic bargain in this country. And this, I know I'm referred to as middle-class Joe, and in this town, that's not an epitaph that's viewed as positive. In this town, it means you're not sophisticated. But I am pretty damn sophisticated about what's happening. About what's happening to the middle class. About what's happening to the middle class. The bargain has been broken. The bargain used to be that if you contribute to the success of an enterprise, if you contributed to the profitability of your company, you got to share in the benefits of your effort. They weren't all reserved, those benefits, for the people at the very top. That was the bargain. A bargain basically established by Franklin Roosevelt and accepted for 6 decades by Democrats and Republicans alike. It's been broken. American workers are the most productive workers in the world. That is not hyperbole, that is a fact. But they share less today in the fruits of that productivity than almost any point in American history. Why? Why do we let that stand? We need to restore this bargain in America, because here is what I really believe. We are one America. We only succeed, and I mean this sincerely, we only succeed when we act as one America. Folks at the top, I don't envy their wealth. Like our friends on the right say, it's wealth envy. It has nothing to do with that. They should be rewarded. But they also have a responsibility, not only to their shareholders, but to their communities, to their country. Folks in the middle, they need to be cut in on the deal, not cut out. And folks at the bottom need to know they've got a chance to climb the ladder of the middle class, Look, the promise of America has always been social mobility. That is the promise. That's the promise upon which it's built. Let me say this as clearly as I can. I make absolutely no apologies for my passion. I make no apologies for how strongly I believe in what I say. I've been at the center of most of the progressive battles for a long, long time. I hate to admit how long. From the civil rights movement to Vietnam, to the right to privacy, to the right to choose, to the incredibly contentious court battles in recent years over health care and guns and campaign financing. I make no apologies. I think most of you know that I have no problem, and I mean this sincerely, not as a humorous line. I make no apologies, and I have no problem for saying exactly what I feel and what I believe. That's why I got into this. But what you may not know is that I think long and hard about what I say, what I believe, and how I say it, because it matters. It matters. Our politics has gotten much too corrosive. It's gotten too personal. It's extremely unattractive. And the American people are sick and tired of it. They're fed up with it. I've seen the corrosiveness of it up close, and so have you. The personal and vile attacks on the president. And I might add, some of the personal attacks on George W. Bush when he was president as well. Personal attacks that are par for the course in our political discourse at every level right now. It's never a problem, as a matter of fact. It's an obligation for us to question the judgment of the opposition when we disagree with it and challenge it constantly. But I think it's inappropriate that we spend so much time questioning not their judgment, but the motivation of the opposition. I'll tell you a story. When I was a kid, when I was 30 years, I think 4 months old, I was sworn in. It is actually relevant, believe it or not. Right after I got elected, my wife and daughter I was down here hiring my staff on December 18th. Still not sworn in, and I got a phone call that a tractor trailer broadsided my wife and 3 children while they were Christmas shopping and killed my wife and daughter instantly. I was uncertain whether my sons were going to live. My oldest son was just about 4 years old. And I decided that it was inappropriate for me to come to the Senate. Wasn't anything noble about it. I just didn't think I could be the kind of father I needed to be and be a senator at the same time. And a number of really fine guys and women, friends of mine, became friends. I didn't know them. They were just icons to me. Senator Mike Mansfield, the majority leader, Teddy Kennedy, Tom Eagleton, a guy from South Carolina named Fritz Hollings, and others. They came to me and said, look, Joe, because I had told my sister who managed my campaign, I said, tell them I'm not going to be sworn in. And my brother, who was my finance director at age 25, went to see the governor-elect to find someone to replace me. Because I wanted to make sure, since I was the first progressive elected in a long time in my state of Delaware, which was all red then, not blue, I wanted to make sure that whoever was picked shared my value set, consistent with what the people voted for. And they came to me and they said, we just come and stay for 6 months, then you can leave. We need you to help us organize the Senate. As naive as I was, I thought they meant it because they already had 58 senators who were Democrats. They didn't really need me. But it probably saved my life, at any rate. And part of the deal was that, although I told them I'd be sworn in, but I decided not to go down and be sworn in, so they sent the chaplain of the Senate the Secretary of the Senate to swear me in the hospital with my sons. So I started going down and commuting back every day. But every Tuesday, if my memory serves me, at 3 o'clock, I would go to the Majority Leader's office, a guy named Mike Mansfield, a man had more integrity in his little finger than most men and women I've met have in their whole body. And he would give me an assignment. And I thought every freshman got an assignment. I really mean it. I didn't realize he was really basically taking my pulse, seeing how I was doing. And one day I walked in. This is going to make this speech too long, and I apologize. One day I walked in, and I used to walk in, you get off the elevator and you go in the side doors, the French doors, the swinging doors going into the Senate on the Republican side. And I would walk down to the floor to see when the last vote was going to be, then walk out the other door into the Majority Leader's office. And a guy named Jesse Helms, who got elected the same year I did, you may know of or heard of Jesse Helms, a very, very, very conservative guy from North Carolina. And he was on the floor excoriating Bob Dole and Ted Kennedy for the Americans with Disability Act. It was being debated. So I walked into Senator Mansfield's office and I sat down. I guess I looked agitated. And he said, Joe, what's bothering you? And I told him what was bothering me. And I said, Jesse Helms has no social redeeming value the way he talks about this, etc. He sat there behind the desk. He was in his 70s then, had been around a long time. He looked at me and he said, Joe, what would you say if I told you that 3.5 years ago, Dot Helms, Mrs. Helms, and Jesse Helms were sitting in their living room reading the Sunday Raleigh Observer. They lived in Raleigh, North Carolina. And there was an advertisement with a young man in an orphanage, a young man in braces, which he still embraces all these years later, saying that all I want is some family to live with and love me. He said, what would you say, Joe, if I told you Jesse Helms went down and adopted that young man as his own child? I said, I'd feel foolish. He said, Joe, I've always found that it's always totally appropriate to challenge a man or woman's judgment, but not their motive. Not their motive, because you really don't know. And besides, Joe, it takes you off the subject. It becomes personal. We can debate passionately without being demeaning. We can have fierce debates without questioning one another's motives. We can make sure we are heard but still listen to the other side. The American people demand we become better. And we can. I know. I've been around long enough to know that politics haven't always been this petty and this personable. And, as a result, produce such little progress. We've got to get past this period of pettiness and relentless cynicism. Because as time goes on, we're becoming more and more diverse as a country, more heterogeneous society. And the temptation to prey on our differences will only grow stronger in seeking political advantage, making the ability to generate consensus more difficult. And how can we govern this great nation as large, as diverse as ours? How can we succeed absent the ability to arrive at consensus Somebody tell me how that's possible. Do we run a great country like this with 50 plus 1 and demand all that we believe government should do with 50 plus 1? It's not possible. Our politics have to be as big and as grand as our people. And today, in the year 2014, America is on the precipice of monumental and consequential changes at home and around the world with such incredible opportunities. I know I'm referred to as the White House optimist. I've been around longer than anybody. The reason I'm optimistic is that I know the history of the journey of this country. We don't need to downsize our dreams and our ambitions. We should be expanding them because the possibilities are immense. Real change only occurs for the better when things are in flux. We're at an inflection point in world history and in American history. Things are changing regardless of what we do, but we have an opportunity. You have an opportunity. I remember my physics professor saying an inflection point is like driving down the highway in your automobile at 60 miles an hour with both hands on the wheel and turning sharply 10 degrees in one direction. It means you can never get back on the same path. The world is turning regardless of what we do. Regardless of what we do. But we have a chance, now that there's movement, to actually affect change, bend history just a little bit. If you're ever going to be involved in public life or in the affairs of your country, now is the time to do that. Every single generation enters the history of the journey of this nation at a point that was written by others. And then they go on to proceed to write their own chapter. But very few generations enter at the point where the opportunity for change, changing the trajectory of the country and the world, is so real. You know, that's the moment this generation faces, just like my generation faced. Now it's your chance to begin to change the system, to rebuild the bargain. Energy pulsing through your generation is already driving the debate. You are already driving the debate. I like to think I did my part for marriage equality. And by the way, it wasn't a half thought, you know. I said exactly what I believed. Because how could I remain silent any longer on this issue? And I know the president agreed with me as well. But do you think it would have happened no matter what I said without the overwhelming consensus on this issue of your generation? Do you think there's any possibility we would have made the progress we've made? I spent my career, as has been pointed out, trying to protect victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. The Violence Against Women Act is the proudest legislative accomplishment of my life. Now we're focusing, I'm insisting we focus on campus assaults, sexual assaults on campus and in high schools among our young people. But that's where you come in. You're the only ones that can change it. You have the ability, your generation, to make it clear, your generation, that anyone engages in this behavior is a pariah. Is a pariah. The greatest sin, my father would say, that a man or woman can commit is the abuse of power. And the ultimate abuse of power is just because of the physical capacity of an individual man to demean a woman. You know, when I meet with progressive groups in the LGBT community, they give me credit. I say, no, you know, you've liberated more straight guys and women than you have, for real. Think about it. 15 years ago, if a group of business women or men were at a restaurant for lunch, and a waiter with a distinct lisp came up and ordered and asked for their order, and someone said, well, let me tell you what I'd like. Everyone around that table, although they thought it was awful, wouldn't say anything, because the consensus was that's appropriate behavior. Imagine what happened today in any major city in America if some horse's tail said that at a luncheon. No, I mean it. I mean this sincerely. Practical things. Everyone else at that table would turn around and say, what in the hell are you talking about, man? Right? That's what has to happen in your generation. No man has a right to raise a hand to you under any circumstance but self-defense. And you guys out there, any man, under any circumstance, who engages in that behavior should be treated for what he is, exorcised from the community of responsible people until the behavior changes. And only you can do that. Only you can do that. Climate change. We're finally gaining traction. Why? Because of your generation. You've insisted on moving forward, cutting carbon emissions, without the overwhelming consensus of the people in this room. Do you think that would be happening? Income inequality. Your generation would be among the most persuasive and articulate voices generating and arguing for a more fair tax system, insisting on reestablishing the bargain. With your help, or put another way, without your help, without your moral support, how does this happen? Comprehensive immigration reform. It's going to continue to be an aspiration unless you demand more. So I'm here to say today, I need you. We need you. I'm not being polite. I'm not being nice. Aren't you a lot of nice young people out there? You underestimate your power. You underestimate your power. I learned in my first campaign that parents and grandparents listened more to their children and grandchildren about political issues than you listen to them. Seriously. You have a profound influence. And I know you're all not really young. Some of you are in your 30s. You're really old. But here's the point, guys. The country needs you. We need you to continue to put pressure on all of us. We need you to continue to reach out. We need you to continue to engage with others. Organize, volunteer. We need some of you to go out and run for public office. And above all, we need you to continue to challenge orthodoxy. Challenge the orthodoxy. Be unrelenting in your challenging the orthodoxy and the assumptions. That's the only way we have grown. That's why we are the most inventive people in the world. Look, folks, this is within our power to change. Everybody says because we tried in 08 and it didn't happen, it's not possible. Wrong. We've gone through these periods before. We've gone through these periods. NICPAC, the Christian Coalition, I can name a bunch just in my career. But folks, this is totally within our power. Change for the better, is absolutely possible, and I believe it's close to inevitable if you're the drivers of it. Every single generation from our founding has carried the responsibility of moving us forward. It sounds like a graduation speech. But it's a fact. It's a fact. And it's always been fueled by commitment and optimism. And notwithstanding the naysayers, there's no reason not to be optimistic. Let me end by telling you a story, and one of the reasons why I continue to be so optimistic. When I was a young guy, I came back from law school. Dr. King, and the only political career I ever had, Robert Kennedy, was assassinated before I walked across the stage to receive my diploma at Syracuse University Law School. And I came home. And I came home with a great job everybody thought was wonderful. There was a what they call a white shoe law firm, the oldest law firm in the state, a very established firm. And although my grades were pretty lousy, I was a pretty good in debate and won the international moot court competition. They decided to take a chance on me. And in Delaware, you only get to take that test to be a lawyer once a year, and you get it in late September. You don't get the answer whether you're a member of the bar until sometime in the end of December, and you get sworn in January. And most of the big firms let you study most of that time for the bar. Well, my city was one of the few cities, Wilmington, Delaware, that was burned to the ground, parts of it. We're the only city since Reconstruction that had the United States military occupying the city for 7 full months. And I was going back and forth to the law library, going back and forth to my office, and seeing guys stationed on corners with drawn bayonets, and state troopers running the city police operation. And I concluded, I can't do this. They're honorable people I worked with. But to the shock and surprise after I got sworn in, I walked across what we call Rodney Square, the town square, after a big case my law firm had in federal court, and walked into the basement of a building and asked the public defender's office whether I could come and work for them. I remember the guy who was hiring then, Frank, looking at me and said, "Are you kidding? You work for Prickett." It was the best decision I ever made. But what happened was, during the next 2 years, I spent an awful lot of time down at the Wilmington train station on the east side of Wilmington, Delaware, and the west side that had been burned. And that's where the National Guard used to bivouac. Fast forward, January the 18th, I was on a bitterly cold day, bright sun, 2009. I was standing on a platform with my son, the Attorney General of the state of Delaware, my other son who heads the World Food Program, USA, and my daughter's a social worker, waiting to be picked up by a young black man taking a train from Philadelphia so he and I could take a 128-mile ride. And as I stood there on that platform, I looked out over the 3rd Street Bridge, and I thought to myself, could I ever have imagined then, fighting for civil rights, that almost 40 years to the day, I'd be standing in this exact same spot to take a ride to Washington to be sworn in as Vice President with the first African-American president in the history of the United States of America. And I thought about it, and I wasn't sure I could remember whether I believed that could happen. But it happened. Does it solve all our problems? No. Is it a mark of immense progress that in my city, when a black man could not walk down the street without being hustled off? Did that happen? Yeah, I think it is. I think it is. And we are poised like no other nation in the world to be the leading economy, to be the most secure nation in the 21st century. And with a lot of luck and a lot of involvement from all of you and a lot of bright people, we have a chance to make the world and this country incrementally better in real terms. So I want to end where I began, by thanking you from the bottom of my heart for your commitment, for your willingness to be engaged, for your embracing and not rejecting the process. But understand, how we conduct our debates matters in terms of whether or not we can ever accomplish consensus. Without consensus, it's hard to realize the vision that has been the one that's been realized every time we've made great progress. And that's when we've been one America. One America. One America. I need you. Thank you. Thank you.